Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. I'm delighted to welcome you to episode 2593 of The Tom Woods Show with our old friend Scott Horton. And of course, the most important thing about Scott Horton right now is, in addition to the Scott Horton Show and the Libertarian Institute, which are indeed quite important, is this monstrosity right here. And I say that lovingly, Scott. I'm referring only to the size of the thing. It's Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. We've done several episodes pulling out some of the material from here. I have a few things I want to talk to Scott about with regard to this. But Scott, I actually want to start with a more meta sort of question, because you've been doing a lot of media and you've talked to a lot of interesting people. But I don't think, for my money, there's anything more memorable than you talking to General Wesley Clark, because Piers Morgan had a panel episode with a bunch of people, but the only two people we really cared about were you and Wesley Clark. So you wound up doing an episode where it was just Piers Morgan overseeing a conversation between the two of you. And I just couldn't help thinking, I'm sure at some level, Scott, even you have to have this thought. I can't believe this world I live in, that I've got this one-on-one hour-long exchange with General Wesley Clark. I don't want to steal your thunder, so you tell people who General Wesley Clark is in case they don't know.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back on the show, Tom. I really appreciate it. As I was bragging to my Twitter audience this morning, your vote of confidence in my work means a lot, especially knowing that the book is so overlong and that you like it anyway. It means it must be really good. So that means a lot. And then as far as Wesley Clark, it occurred to me that essentially in a way, I'm kind of untested, right? I spent a lot of years just doing pirate radio. You know, when I first started doing pirate radio, whenever I interviewed a bad guy, I would always whoop them. And then they would always threaten to call the FCC on me and my friends. So I just kind of adopted a policy of, you know what, I just want to interview Gareth Porter about the great thing he wrote. And I don't want to fight with these kooks. But then in a sense, that means that I'm untested, sort of. You know, maybe I'm not right about all this stuff, because how often do I go up against somebody who, you know, really represents the war party well? And now I've got a few of those under my belt, and he was one of them. And yeah, he's definitely the biggest get so far. He blows.
So who was? I mean, the 1990s. Who was it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as I flubbed this line, I don't know how I misspoke this stupid line in the conversation with him. But he was the chief of policy planning for the Joint Staff, which maybe sounds like a lot of words, but that's an incredibly important position in the Pentagon. That means he works for the Joint Chiefs, and he's the director of policy planning for all of their staff and their plans for everything in the world. So that's huge. And then from there, he was promoted to Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe, where he prosecuted the war against Serbia to break off Kosovo in 1999. And he's also the guy, your audience is more familiar with him from the clip, and there are two different versions of this, I believe, where he explains that he went to the Pentagon right after September 11th, and he was shown a memo by the neoconservatives that said they wanted to attack all of Israel's enemies. And, you know, he never mentioned that part of it, but I reframe the whole thing as what he's describing. This is the clean break strategy. This is all about the Netanyahu doctrine for the Middle East. And he agreed that, yes, that is right. Although he'd never been put to that before, I don't think. So I made him connect those neoconservative doctrines with Likud doctrine, and he certainly did not deny it. And as people are familiar, the story is they wanted America to hit Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, meaning Hezbollah, Somalia, Libya, and I'm leaving off one. And did I say Syria? And Iran, finishing up with Iran. And this was, you know, the Netanyahu doctrine essentially for America's war on terrorism after September 11th. And so that's what he was more familiar with. And then I was able to bring that up in the discussion with him. Oh, by the way, my flub, I don't like having things uncorrected out in the universe. I think I did write about this on Twitter. Somehow, Tom, in the middle of saying that this general worked in the Pentagon as the chief of policy planning on the Joint Staff. My mouth, not my consciousness in any way, but my mouth said the word CIA in the middle of that.
Oh,
and I saw him on the replay. I saw him like scoff. Like at first, his initial reaction was, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And then after another second, when he realized I did know what I was talking about, I could see the realization in his mind that, I simply misspoke.
right.
But I felt like such an idiot because how in the world, it's not like I think that. I mean, how in the world did my mouth say that stupid wrong thing in the middle of the title, Chief of Policy Planning on the Joint Staff in the U.S. Army? You know, I don't know.
Well, let's talk for a minute though about these conversations. So, it was not as contentious in terms of like the heat of the conversation as somebody might have expected. And what was interesting is that I believe I don't think he was contemptuous of you or dismissive of you. I think he treated you as a worthy adversary.
Yeah. Well, I think what happened was on the first time he was on, what happened was, as you said, it was a panel discussion, and then Piers Morgan brought him on in the middle of it and gave him way more time. And he was able to say all these things about the bearded gentleman there who I disagree with. And I was barely able to answer. I was able to say a few things. But it was enough, I think, that as you say, the conversation kind of quickly became just me and him. And so I think it was enough on that first exchange that he realized I at least knew something about it. So then when it was over, I tweeted to Piers Morgan and his people and said, hey, how about just a one-on-one with me and him at something like equal time to discuss this? And I guess I bought myself enough credibility with him and with them that they said, okay, well, that sounds reasonable then. How about Monday morning? I was like, well, I'm going to be in Nashville to do the Candace Owens show, but I can squeeze it in the morning before I head off to do her show. So cool. So I sat there in the van in the parking lot of the hotel and did the thing. And then, so I thought about this, and I can be very hot-headed. I swear to God, I was on the phone with my guy Connor right before I debated Neil Ferguson. Sir Neil.
The guy who won't talk faster, even if you ask him to.
I know, seriously, man. I wanted to. Anyway, I says to Connor, I go, this guy's going to be totally aloof and British, whatever kind of attitude. So I got to make sure and not get angry. I got to play it really cool. And then, of course, I started cussing at him immediately just because I hate Neil Ferguson so much. But with Wesley Clark, I know that Piers Morgan has a massive audience of millions of people, all of whom know who Wesley Clark is, and none of whom know who I am. And like, quite frankly, he was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe. And I'm some guy who supposedly wrote a book. So what, according to any fresh mind who doesn't know me, they have no reason to give me the benefit of the doubt. So the burden of proof is entirely on me. And of course, if I go and say bad things about Clark, they're all things that he can deny. And then he's the authoritative source on them. And all I can do is say, well, that's what I read in the newspaper or whatever, right? If I want to bring up something that he did wrong from the war in Serbia or whatever. So there's no point in bringing up any specific accusation against him or anything that he did during his job in the military. As far as that, so I thought, well, I just have to treat him as respectfully as I can. But of course,
but wasn't there that point where you said to him, you laid out this was the general's position in the 1990s, and he said, "You're right."
Yes, look, I mean, the whole thing. He said, "You're right." Essentially, now he had to say. Because his position in the 90s was, to be specific here, the Secretary of Defense, William Perry, didn't want to expand NATO and tried to fight against it. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Shalikashvili, agreed with him. And so did Wesley Clark, the chief of policy planning for the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. They all tried to stop it. And when I brought that up the first time, I guess this is what bought me enough credibility that I knew that story, because I just wrote a book about it, right? So, this is what bought me enough credibility in that first interview that he agreed to the second, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But when I brought that up, his only argument was, no, I was wrong and Bill Clinton was right to overrule me. I didn't know what I was talking about. And he was
that's a terrible answer.
That's right. And I said no, because in fact, I don't think I had a chance to say this, or I missed the chance to say this at least the first time. But in the second round, I did say, well, no, I mean, we're at war right now. So that goes to show that it didn't work. The whole idea with NATO expansion was, don't worry, it'll be fine. Well, it's not fine. So, no, you were right the first time. And how do you argue with that other than just total self-abasement? I think I scored on that point for sure, you know?
Yeah.
And I was lucky too, in a horrible way. Sorry, Syrians, I don't mean it like this, but it just so happened that Al-Qaeda sacked Damascus in the meantime between our two interviews from like between Thursday and Monday. So the first question was, so what do you think about what's going on in Syria? And I said, well, it's treason. Joe Biden is supporting Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, the head-chopping suicide bomber lunatics led by a guy who fought against our guys in Iraq War II. And then Piers Morgan says to Wesley Clark, well, geez, General, what about that? And he goes, yeah, I mean, that's right. I don't know what to say. And then he says, well, at least they're holding their military together. So hopefully they're learning the lesson from our failure in Iraq with the deballification and disbanding the military. But then, of course, the Israelis started canceling that. The next day started completely carpet bombing all of Syria's military assets, sank their naval fleet, bombed all their weapons depots, and smashed the SAA into a million pieces. So now Al-Qaeda doesn't control it either. It's just gone. And we will have nothing but war and tribes. It's straight out of the Yan'an Plan from 1981. You ever read the Yan'an Plan, Tom? I'm sorry, I'm off on a tangent, but your audience should read this. It's bad-ass crazy stuff. This guy, he's a Likudnik theorist, and Oded Yan'an. And he's saying, oh my God, the Soviet communists are going to take over the whole world and including America. The world is doomed to Soviet communist slavery forever. This is, 7 years before the fall of the wall. Anyway, and he says, so the only hope is for Israel, the last bastion of freedom in the world, will be to smash all of the neighboring Arab states into little warring tribal pieces, destroy the nation states, and so that they're all weak, so that we can be relatively strong compared to them in a world of impending total world communist slavery. And then this is essentially the Likud way of looking at things ever since Begin and Netanyahu and the rest.
Hey, everybody, are you being lied to? The establishment insists the only way to have enough money to retire is to put your life savings into a 401k or IRA and then roll the dice with it in the Wall Street casino. But if that were true, why do studies show the average American following that advice will outlive his savings by a staggering 10 years? It's time to get the truth and discover a better way to grow and protect your money. Bank on Yourself is the proven retirement plan alternative banks and Wall Street hope you'd never hear about. It gives you guaranteed predictable growth and retirement income. With Bank on Yourself, your plan doesn't go backward when the markets tumble. Your principal and growth are locked in. Tax-free retirement income. You'll know your tax rate in retirement. 0 under current tax law, which protects you from the coming tax tsunami. And you're in control. You get access to your money for emergencies and opportunities with no questions asked. There are no government penalties or restrictions on how much or when you can take it. Try doing that with an IRA. And as a matter of fact, when you use your money, it keeps growing like you never touched it. And your money is guaranteed to grow by a larger dollar amount every year in good times and bad. You can get a free report that reveals how you can bank on yourself and enjoy tax-free retirement income, guaranteed growth, and control of your money. Just go to bankonyourself.com/woods and get your free report. That's bankonyourself.com/woods. bankonyourself.com/woods. Did William Perry say that if we expand NATO, there's going to be a reaction from Russia that would, obviously, to utter an understatement, damage relations between the United States and Russia? But did he predict that it would come to this point, that the kinds of things we're seeing now would happen? And if so, then how does Clark say he was wrong? He was obviously right.
Well, okay, so on the first part, I don't know that Perry said, geez, if you think about the dominoes, it's probably going to end up a war over the Donbas. You know what I mean? I'm not sure that he was
right. Not that specific.
But overall, yes, this was the problem. I got to tell you, man, there's just, from every single warning against it, I talk about in the book how in the 1990s, and they missed the boat. It was already too late. Policy had already been decided. But George Kennan, and it wasn't just him, but Robert McNamara, who had run the Vietnam War for Kennedy and Johnson, the Secretary of Defense, Paul Nitze, who was, the right-wing rival to George Kennan, his former protege, and the sitting Secretary of Defense, Perry, and a whole bunch of them, Susan Eisenhower, Ike Eisenhower's granddaughter, had a joint letter by like 75 officials, Defense Department and foreign policy officials, admirals and generals of every kind. And this goes then all the way through to the W. Bush years. Why did everybody try to stop W. Bush from the Bucharest Declaration and all this in 2008? And the few, but there's some severe warnings in 2004 about further expansion then. The argument all along from every single person involved was this is going to unnecessarily pick a fight with the Russians. We're not erasing the dividing line in Europe. We're moving it east. Now, Ted Carpenter and Ron Paul and our other heroes would say that, of course, and it costs the American taxpayer a bunch of money to buy a bunch of fighter jets for these other countries and all these things. The libertarians did complain about that. But as far as the foreign policy establishment, it doesn't care about the cost of anything. They still warn we should not be doing this because it is an unnecessary provocation against Russia. It's the one and only case they ever made. And of course, at the time they were saying this is going to cost us, for example, the ratification of the START II treaty, which in fact W. Bush finally killed when he tore up the ABM treaty in 2002. That also killed START II. Well, START II would have banned multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, Tom. Multiple warheads from a single rocket would have been banned by that. One might think that piece of paper was the most important thing in the history of humanity, huh? Think about that for one moment, maybe, but no. They threw that away because they got a bigger, better priority, they think, And then, of course, it's all, okay, now to the point about the current war, he says, well, no, Clinton was right and I was wrong, even if there's a war going on now. I'm putting words in his mouth a little bit, but taking into account the fact that there's currently a war, he says, because that was all Putin's fault. It's not a reaction to what we did. It's just that, and this is why Bill Clinton decided to expand and why W. Bush and everyone else knew that he was right to, is because they recognized what a thug Putin was and that anything short of this alliance, he was going to run roughshod over everyone. So they're essentially retconning the history, right, to say that the reaction to what they did is the reason that they did it. And what's hilarious about that, of course, is this is exactly what George Kennan said in 1998. He told Thomas Friedman, it's in the New York Times, that I'll tell you what's going to happen here. All the NATO expanders who say it's going to be fine, now, when Russia does react, those same people are going to say, see, that's why we need NATO. And just in their own self-fulfilling prophecy. And there are plenty of quotes of this. Madeleine Albright also in there says, well, if the Russians do react and things get bad, well, there's always NATO. So the alliance itself is the reason that it won't be a problem if expanding the alliance actually does blow up in our face. Then at least we'll have our alliance. And the whole thing is completely crazy and as predictable as anything could be. And the slowest motion train wreck, worse than Iraq.
So it's not just in the Middle East then. It's a working assumption that no country ever really reacts to what the U.S. does to it. That in any degree that we should even care about. They were always going to do what they were going to do, regardless of what we do.
That's right. Just as Harry Brown used to say, history began on September 11th, or whenever you want. I think he's the one who really coined that, a history began thing, maybe not. But that was the first place I ever heard it. You're never supposed to ask about what caused these things to happen. And, in this case, when you just have so many warnings, I think, pardon me if I'm being redundant, but in 2008, when W. Bush is pushing for the Bucharest Declaration, the ambassador to Russia, our current CIA director, Burns, who, as far as I don't know, maybe CIA all along, he's a career Foreign Service diplomat, had been stationed in Russia since the 1990s and was Bush's ambassador to Russia. Well, he and the entire embassy warned him not to do the Bucharest Declaration. And then he wrote in his memoir that he thought Secretary Rice agreed with him. Now, I didn't read her memoir. She's got one. I don't know what she says she told Bush, if she tried to warn him or not or what. But Burns says that he thought she agreed with him. And we know, Tom, that Robert Gates agreed because Robert Gates slammed Bush, called it, really criticized him and called it a drastic overreach or something like that in his second memoir. So that's the ambassador, the entire embassy, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense. But then Fiona Hill, who now calls this Russian propaganda, if you repeat it, even though you just read her talking to the New York Times, says that she and the entire National Security Council staff all warned against it. All the Russia hands on the National Security Council. I don't know the exact anecdote, but that must have included Thomas Graham as well on the National Security Council. All told Bush, don't do it. And why did he do it? As Burns put it, it was a legacy building operation for W. Bush. In other words, Tom, public choice theory had nothing to do with what's good for America or mankind or any other thing. It's just that W. Bush was the world's greatest loser. The historians said he was as bad a president as Woodrow Wilson or Franklin Roosevelt. Oh, no, they love Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt. They said he was as bad as, I don't know, some good president we had a long time ago or something, that he was ranked among the worst in all history. He, of course, his legacy was supposed to be Iraq War II, which is an absolute catastrophe, and which everyone agreed by the end of his presidency. And then his other plan, he's going to use his popularity from the war so he could privatize Social Security, put all the IOUs in the stock market bubble, the same one that crashed 2 months before he lost, had to leave power, 3 months before he had to leave power. And he didn't get that. AARP wouldn't let him get away with that. So what was his legacy? Nothing. So he had to come up with something. And even when he went to Iraq on his victory lap, some guy threw a shoe at him and humiliated him. So he had absolutely nothing. And so instead of drowning himself in his bathtub, he decided, I know what I'll do. I'll expand NATO. I'll promise to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. And that will be a big, bold, decisive thing to do. See? And then they'll write about me and sing a song and say I'm great. And so that was it. According to Burns, despite the advice of every single expert in the government other than maybe in Vice President Cheney's office. But man, by spring of 2008, it's not like Bush really fell under Cheney's thumb and that he had to do whatever Cheney said by then. He'd been burned by Cheney enough times. He absolutely disregarded his advice to go to war with Russia over Georgia a couple months later. So it's on him 100%. Absolute dumbest thing in the world, but it just goes to show, right? No one was asking Ron Paul. We were. They weren't. They were asking Burns. They were asking Gates and Rice and Hill, Fiona Hill, who's like one of the most obnoxious anti-Russia hawks in the country right now. 15 years ago was saying, W. Bush, this is the dumbest thing in the world. Don't do it.
Did General Clark accuse you of spreading quote unquote Russian propaganda at any time?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I don't recall that. Well, I mean, another panelist did.
Yeah, other panelists did on that show. I guess I conflate them all in my head. I did the show once with just some idiot that I got in an argument with. And the second time was the one with the Ukrainian girl she said I was a Russian propagandist. Oh, how much are they paying you? Yeah, you're brilliant. I'm sure so many people were persuaded by that. I've been doing this since 1998, but whatever, dude. Anyway, and then that was the one where Clark was brought on. And then the next episode was just me and him.
Right.
So I think by the time it was just me and him, he wasn't gonna like hit below the belt because there wasn't any point in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it was only these desperate losers that I had argued with before who they had nothing. She says, how can you say that the Maidan was supported by America? I was there. Yeah. Who bought you all those hot cooked meals? You? No, I did. So shut up. What do you mean?
Can we stop?
In a tent? You brought your own tent? Is that right? Yeah, right.
Hey, everybody, there aren't a lot of things in this world that you can absolutely rely on. But one of them is that American health insurance is going to get worse and worse every year. We know that because we live it. It gets worse. It gets more expensive. It seems like we're paying more and more for less and less. We pay huge premiums. Then we pay again when we go to get treatment. It's unbelievable. And the idea that it's been made more affordable is absolutely laughable. Then you got to navigate, is this covered? Is that covered? Are they going to deny this? The whole process is opaque and annoying and frustrating. Well, there's another way to do it, and that is crowd health. Crowd health is not insurance, but it's another way to pay for health care through crowdfunding. So for $175 for an individual or $575 for a family of 4 or more, you will get access to a community of people willing to help out in the event of an emergency. So we're talking about telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, so much more. You don't have to worry about doctors' networks, and you'll be part of the crowd, which is a group of members like you who want to help each other when you have an unexpected medical event. Well, let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. Get started today for just $99 per month for your first 3 months by using code WOODS at joincrowdhealth.com. Crowd Health is not insurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com. And don't forget code WOODS. Well, can we stop there for a minute? Because that is one of the things that they will say is an example of Russian propaganda, because the Russians themselves did say that this was done by the West, that what happened in 2014 was a coup by the West. And there obviously have been people on our side who have said, yes, it was a coup by the West. And so you can say, well, I mean, the Russians say that, and you also say it. So there you have it. So whereas the other side says there's no way something of this scale could have been carried out by the U.S., whatever the series of arguments is, or that they say that but Yanukovych was maybe going to leave on his own already anyway, or whatever. They have a whole bunch of things. So there is no. I know we have a what is it? Is it a Victoria Nuland recording or something talking about the new government? Yeah. But I mean, are we assuming that it's a coup? What do we really know?
Well, look. First of all, go back and look at all the color-coded revolutions. That's Justice Raimondo called it the Ukrainian template. That really began in Albania and Croatia in 98. And then with Serbia and the Bulldozer Revolution of 99, the Rose Revolution in Georgia of 2003, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan in 2005. Of course, there's the failed, everyone remembers, there was the failed one in Lebanon, the Cedar Revolution 05. And then I think probably everyone remembers in the Obama years, the Green Revolution in Iran in 2009. This is the Ukrainian template, the National Endowment for Democracy, and along with the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and a variety of non-governmental organizations, almost all of them backed by George Soros and or Pierre Omidyar. He's one of the founders of eBay and was the original founder of First Look Media and The Intercept there. I guess he still owns The Intercept. And of course, George Soros, the international Hungarian-American international currency speculator, billionaire, and longtime international intriguer. They essentially, the template is you dispute the election you lost and you insist that, no, we have to listen to the exit polls, not the ballot count, and then force your way through. That's the basic template for how they do it. And I should have mentioned, of course, the Denim Revolution that they tried and failed in 2005 in Belarus is another important one. They keep doing this. And then, so the background and the understanding of it, the way it is they put in tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars into these non-governmental organizations. And through the big Soros foundations, then they create a whole garden full of, tens or hundreds of different ones for influencing the legal system. They create, all new so-called independent. I love the way they just, with an absolute straight face every time, like they really have never even thought of the irony at all, create independent media in these countries. And they mean independent from the central state, which might be fine, but not independent from their power and influence at all, of course, and always on behalf of not the people of the country, but the people of the country who agree with what the Americans want to see happen there is the side that they're backing. I mean, imagine, Tom, sorry if I'm being redundant, if your audience heard me say this somewhere else too, but I think I said this to Jack Posovic before that. Imagine that they meant what they said, that they really only just mean to spread democracy throughout the world. And they support all these NGOs just to make sure that there are free and fair elections all the time. But Tom, they really, really, really don't care who wins. And they would never prefer that a certain pro-Western candidate prevail over the Russian lady one. Why? No, this is all purely about the form of democracy so that the people of the world have, bicameral legislatures and independent judiciaries and regular elections and bills of rights. And yeah, right. Give me a break. This is the American empire. It's all about making sure that our guy wins. If he doesn't win, then we figure out another way to make sure he wins. I like the way you brought up, because people do say this, that like, oh, we could never do something so huge. Or America's overthrown like 75 governments since World War II, certainly more than 50. I kind of tongue-in-cheek say that I have a paragraph in the book. I go, look, they say it's not fair. You're denying the agency of the people on the ground, right? And I go, well, look, of course they have agency. They have the agency, the American CIA, intervening in their sock puppets in the NED and USAID and the IRI and NDI and the rest. Because, of course, as Reyes Klein, I quote Reyes Klein talking about the most famous American coup in Iran in 1953. He said, the name of the game, of course, is all about providing just the right amount of influence on the margin to make the difference. That's effective political action. Nobody thinks that they're parachuting a bunch of white boys from, I don't know, Kansas to come in and be the new government of Iran. No, they overthrew Mossadegh to reinstall the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. He was an Iranian, but it was still a CIA coup d'etat. He was the former dictator. We were reinstalling him. It was still the CIA that did it because they provided just the right amount of marginal action to make sure that the right guy won. This is why they lied to the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1980, Tom, because they said, we know this guy. He was our friend. Oh, 79, I meant to say. We know this guy. He's our friend from back in 1953. He helped us overthrow Mossadegh. We can deal with him. And that's why Jimmy Carter, on advice from the CIA and the State Department, told the French to put the Ayatollah on the plane and send him back to Tehran to inherit the revolution, because he's our guy. He, supporting his group, was part of the marginal influence that they used, that they intervened to get what they wanted. Well, in this case, marginal nothing. And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars going into the NGOs who are supporting the entire Maidan movement. They couldn't have done any of it without the Americans paying their way. And that is huge. Rock concerts. And look, it's cold out there. This is all taking place in the winter months of December, January, February. It's freezing cold outside. They have all the heat that they need, all the fuel that they need for heat. They have rock concerts and entertainment, movie screens of every kind. They have these polystyrene foam boards that they can lay on the ground that really insulate from the cold. So people could just, throw a sleeping bag on one of these boards and with their tents and all of this stuff. Oh, actually, that one might have been 2004 with the polystyrene boards. Anyway, same thing. Same NGOs come. They put on the whole event. And then, yes, of course, a lot of people, especially from Western Ukraine, showed up to support the protest movement. Just like you could have a big protest movement and have, well, for example, Tom, I sat there and watched, I was part of it. There was something like 50,000 people, maybe more than that, maybe 60 or 70 or something, protesting against Iraq War II at the Texas state capitol. You think we represented the will and the popular opinion of the people of the state of Texas in February and March of 2003? I am ashamed to tell you that no, we did not at all, right? And if someone had come in and some foreign country come in and poured tens of millions of dollars into that protest movement, we could have kept it going longer too. Maybe even overthrown the governor, Rick Perry. That would have been fun. But at no point would you argue that, the protesters of Austin, Texas represent the will of the people out in the countryside and all the major cities of El Paso and Dallas, Fort Worth and San Antonio and Houston. Yeah, right. We do not either. And everybody knows, same kind of thing here. The majority population of Ukraine is in the far east of the country. They weren't out there supporting this thing. So we go, oh, you're denying the agency of the people. Come on. They couldn't have done what they did without the foreign money and influence. So, yeah, that's what makes it an American and Western operation. Now, as far as the phone call, I guess I admit to oversimplifying this a little bit in the past, Tom. But not really. Essentially, what's happening is Yeah, and anyone can listen to the phone call. They took down the original version off of YouTube, of course, but people can find the replay of it. What's happening here is Victoria Nuland is not expressing her opinion. This is Robert Kagan's wife. She's at that time, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. So something like the ambassador to the EU type, ambassador at large for European Affairs type position. And she's on the phone with the ambassador to Ukraine, and she's just calling the shots. This is her project, and she's in charge. And I'm going to tell you right now what's going to happen. I don't want this guy, and I don't want this guy. But I do want this guy to train this guy, but I want this guy. Yatsenyuk. Yats is the guy. He's going to be the prime minister. Now, what they're talking about, although this is a bit disputable for a variety of reasons, is the president had already fired the prime minister, or had promised to, and had offered for the protest leaders, some of them, to join the government. But in the offer, first of all, the protest leaders had immediately rejected it. And secondly, the guy that she's saying, no, I don't want Klitschko, or was it Tannibach, that she's saying, I forgot. It's one of the two that she's saying, I don't want this guy in the government at all. Forget that. Well, he wasn't offered one of the positions in the deal anyway, that had been rejected already anyway. But the ongoing negotiation essentially is to force the president to agree to early elections and then to accept a new prime minister and essentially American control over his government in the meantime, which is already a coup de Biden. It's already something. I don't care exactly what the French term is. I got in a fight with this absolutely insufferable podcaster, known something or other. And I went and I asked the Chat GPT, tell me all the different kind of coups for overthrowing a government in French. And there's like 10 of them. There's a coup de judiciary, a coup de electoral shenanigans, a coup de polystyrene board on the ground, a coup de Joe Biden and the U.S. world empire dump tens of millions of dollars into your country and overthrow the government. I don't care. You can call it. And so then, but here's what happened though, Tom, is that the Americans and the EU and the Russians forced Yanukovych to sign a deal with the EU. It was the EU deal, but Putin got on the phone and told Yanukovych to sign it. And that agreement said he would agree to early elections. He would accept the American picked prime minister. He would agree to early elections, and he would pull his police back from the protests on the Maidan if they would end the protests and go home and pull, especially their gunmen, back. Well, of course, that part didn't happen. And when the protest leaders went out there onto the stage and announced the deal, a neo-Nazi named Parasyuk, who is already confessed to being the leader of the snipers from the music conservatory who got the firefight going the day before with the police, ran up on a stage and said, forget that. We're not doing this deal. We don't accept any deal where the president stays. And in fact, now that I'm hollering, if he doesn't leave town by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'm going to murder him myself. I swear to God. And the crowd says, yeah, yeah. And the New York Times said, oh, yeah, boy, that was it. This is absolutely the credible threat. They were not playing around. And by morning, Yanukovych had fled and his security forces with them. And so the neo-Nazis on the ground, who were at least 10, maybe more % of the population of the protest movement, but absolutely were the ones who were getting all the business done. As all the academic studies verify, since then, it was their violence that accomplished the regime change and this street putsch. Now, I don't know of anyone, Tom, who ever said that the CIA told Parasyuk to do that, or that this was that every single, how dare you deny the agency, Tom? Are you saying that every single neuron that fired in the brain of every single person on that Maidan had been cooked up in a laboratory in Virginia somewhere? No. But what we are saying, obviously, is that the entire situation, including forcing the guy to, under all these sanctions and threats of worse, to accept a regime change within the form of his own government was already a coup. And support for the ongoing protests and disorder on the Maidan was what made the street putsch that came to, that culminated the whole thing in the final regime change possible. And so, how do you, on a percentage, on a numerical basis, how do you quantify the degree of responsibility of Barack Obama and Joe Biden and their agents in the thing? I don't know. It's a matter of quality, right? It's a matter of opinion, a matter of balance. But if you understand the context, and hey, after all, that is another important point too. The American side, the leaders, I don't know, John McCain, he didn't know anything, but the actual policy planners here, they had to have known about the influence of these extremely dangerous neo-Nazi groups like the Svoboda Party and the various descendants of the OUN UPA from World War II and the Cold War. They knew who these guys were, and they went ahead with the thing anyway. Let them run wild anyway. I have, there's so many quotes, and especially after the war broke out, where Obama administration officials were like, hey, they might be Nazis, but they're fighting against the Russians. So we need all the hands we can get. And these same people would say that anyone to the right of Whoopi Goldberg in America is a fascist Nazi white supremacist, right? Say that these actual fascist Nazi white supremacists who are the proud grandsons of the men who helped the Hitlerian German army commit the Holocaust in World War II, as I document thoroughly in the book, hey, they're just moderate rebels trying to do better, right? Like Al-Qaeda in Damascus. They're okay, Tom. They're only as bad as Hamas now. And now Hamas is so bad that you can kill any kid under the excuse that they're a couple of miles away from some guy who's supposedly in Hamas. But Al-Qaeda, they're not bad because they're only as bad as Hamas. Now, if you, talk about 40 miles away to the northeast there. Same kind of thing here. These guys are neo-Nazis. And yeah, we sided with the Soviet communists to destroy Nazi Germany or anything. But in this case, we're siding with Nazis to destroy Republican Russia with a red, white, and blue flag. That seems kind of odd and extreme.
Well, so in light of that, I want to ask you a question then that I think Tucker Carlson might have asked Putin, if I'm remembering this right. But all right, so if this is really what happened in 2014,
yeah,
why does it take until 2022 for there to be an invasion of Ukraine?
Oh, sure. Well, there was a war broke out almost immediately. What happened was the previous presidents, as soon as the new coup junta took over in Kiev, and was immediately recognized by the United States, the previous three presidents, Kravchuk, Kuchma, and Yushchenko, all signed a letter demanding that the new government now tear up the Kharkiv Pact and kick the Russians out of the Sevastopol naval base, home of the Black Sea Fleet. And as soon as they did that, Putin then, and they also they actually called a halt, I think, at American insistence, but it was kind of too late. They immediately moved to pass a law outlawing Russian as an official language in the country. And so this, helped to spur Putin to order his sailors and Marines essentially to leave their base at Sevastopol and just walk across Crimea and take the whole thing. It was what they call a coup de main, one big takeover, one big successful surprise attack. Or in this case, only I think 4 people or 6 people were killed in a couple of exchanges of fire, a couple civilians and a couple soldiers on each side. And then that was it. Then you see why in Kiev and in Washington and the rest of Europe, I guess, especially in Eastern Europe, that they really freaked out about that. And I guess especially in Kiev and in Washington, when protesters from the East started seizing government buildings and saying, if you can seize buildings and overthrow the government, then we can seize buildings and refuse to recognize your new authority. Because Yanukovych had been elected in a free and fair election. He had crushed the winners of the Orange Revolution in a free and fair election in 2010. They said, if you can overthrow our elected president, then we can surely occupy buildings and refuse to respect your authority. Now, as I show in the book, people say, oh, Russians were leading all this, but that's not really true. They didn't really show up until later, and there's still only a couple of them. And I know you're not denying the agency of all the people in the East, these giant protests of people who went to occupy these government buildings and refuse to accept the rule of the new government there. But they had not committed any overt act of war. The worst thing that they had done was seize the local Interior Ministry building. And then the new government, we know, is right there in Forbes magazine. You can read about it. I think they were the ones who broke it originally, that John Brennan, the same guy who was, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria 10 years ago, and the same guy who framed Donald Trump for treason in 2015 and 16. he went to Kiev and ordered them to attack. And, Forbes reported that covert war has begun. The next day, the overt war began. He got there on the 12th. They launched the attack on the 14th and brought in artillery and tanks and planes and hit them with airstrikes and with military force. And so then at that point, a huge part of the military defected to the other side and civil war broke out. And now the Russians had deniable forces there in very small numbers until August of 14, when they did intervene in one big battle and humiliated the Ukrainians. And that helped lead to negotiations for the first Minsk peace deal in November. And so then, but that didn't really take, they met a few weeks later and they added some addendums to it. But the war basically continued through the end of 14 and into the beginning of 15. And then the Russians intervened again blatantly in February of 15 and handed another major defeat to the Ukrainians. At that point, they again met in Minsk. And this was Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande, the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France, went there and met with Poroshenko, who was the new president of Ukraine, and with Vladimir Putin. And they hammered out this deal. And it's called Minsk II. And it essentially promised to amend the Constitution to provide for strong autonomy, strong federalism, basically for the east of the country. And so from that point, so from the beginning of the war to that point, Tom, I believe it was like 9,000 something killed. And then at that point, we switched from real like heavy fighting to what they call low level fighting, which means there was a so-called gray zone, although it's a weird misuse of that term. I don't know what you call it, sort of a no man's land between the warring sides, and then sort of a low level artillery war and, occasional special forces type raids back and forth across the territory for the next 7 years. Or was it next 6, whatever. I'm sorry, I can't do arithmetic live on the radio, but, and so, the Russians, essentially, they already had a deal and they were trying to insist that it be implemented. Now, Trump came in 17 and he ran on getting along with Russia. He was elected on that. It's not like that was a secret policy or something. He ran or he wanted to get along with Russia, and the American people elected him on that basis. But then you might remember they framed him for treason. Oh yeah, we discussed that last time I was on the show. So once they framed him for treason, his hands were almost entirely removed from Russia-Ukraine policy. And that thing was essentially on autopilot. If he had truly attempted to learn everything he could about it and take the reins, maybe he could have. But the Russiagate scandal just completely mired him in these baseless accusations. It's completely crazy the way when I tell the story now, I know I sound crazy. I go, well, see, they thought they might invoke the 25th Amendment, like the guy had a stroke and put Melania in charge. But they were going to really do that. But they couldn't. So then they decided to launch a fake special counsel investigation, even though they already had proven and already had decided amongst themselves that they knew for a fact he was innocent. And they would do that just to rein him in. It sounds like I'm talking about a foreign country or a comic book or some ridiculous lie. But that's what really happened. Anyway, see last episode, everybody, if you want to catch up on that.
We did a whole episode on Russiagate.
Yeah.
For people who don't know.
Yeah. So then that was a huge part of why the peace deal never got implemented during the Trump years. The peace deal said, Tom, that, and there's a whole order of operations, but essentially they were supposed to hold new elections and then implement this new strong federalism, essentially like statehood for the far eastern provinces, and more autonomy, not full secession, but more autonomy from the central government there. But the Ukrainian side, the Kiev America side, Obama side, changed the deal and tried to insist that Ukraine must control all the territory. Their armed forces must control all the territory of the entire country, including the entire border with Russia. And only then can they hold new elections. Well, that was not the deal. And you might say, well, geez, how can they hold elections while Russian troops are there? Supposedly, at least. Well, I don't know, good question, but that was the deal. And there's no way in the world that even the fighters in the East, never mind the Russians, are going to allow Ukraine to occupy the entire country and including the entire border before they allow elections to be held. They would make the same argument. How do you expect there to be a free and fair election if Kiev has soldiers all over the place before they're allowed to hold the vote? And so then, and this is a huge scandal. Nobody ever makes enough of this, Tom, but in 2019, after Zelensky was elected on peace, the German Foreign Minister Steinmeier introduced the Steinmeier formula, which was essentially a new order of operations that was supposed to be a compromise, an acceptable compromise for how the Minsk II deal could be implemented, where its various aspects would be implemented in an order that both sides could accept. And first of all, the fascists held a bunch of rallies called No to Capitulation and threatened to murder the new president if he would dare make peace. That would be sacrificing the lives of all the martyrs in the sunk cost fallacy in the war so far. Can't have that. And then, Tom, in just the worst betrayal of mankind, it's the same kind of thing that Warren Zimmerman did to start the Bosnian War in 1993 when he destroyed the Lisbon deal. That was in 1992. But so this Ambassador William Taylor told Zelensky's government not to sign. Was it earlier in the year when it was still Poroshenko? Forgive me. It was in 2019. I think it was after Zelensky took power. And William Taylor told him, don't do it. He ridiculed it. He goes, the Steinmeier formula. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. Hell, Steinmeier doesn't even know what it is. The whole thing's completely ridiculous, and essentially dismissed it and applied pressure to prevent the peace deal from being implemented, which is, becoming tradition around here. That's the way all that happens. So in answer to your question then, Putin was hoping that he could get the peace deal that they already had for 6 years, to be implemented under the Trump administration, was clearly holding up hope for. Then Biden comes in and it's absolutely belligerent from the very beginning. And one of the first things he does is encourage and applaud the Zelensky government when they crack down and seize all the property from a guy named Viktor Medvedchuk, who is a Ukrainian oligarch who's close to Putin, whose daughter is Putin's goddaughter. And they seize all his property, including his TV channel. And it seems like that was a probable final straw for Vladimir Putin in the spring of 2021. And then, as I show in the book, I have a whole section that's I think it's just called 2021. Or I guess it used to be. Now I ended up renaming it. But anyway, I just do the whole first year of the Biden administration, which is provocation after provocation. All they would do is show strength. Let's have more naval exercises, more Air Force heavy bombers practicing first strikes, more promises from the state and defense departments that we're going to move forward with NATO expansion, and we're going to move forward with interoperability and the arming up of their military force. And all of this is, and forgive me, Tom, if I'm being redundant from previous shows. I've been saying this a lot lately, but it's a huge part of it, is that these people, they always speak in these weak historical analogies because they really don't know what they're talking about. And then they don't really know anything about the historical analogies they're talking about either. But you'll know what I mean when I say that Joe Biden just thinks that, look, Putin is Hitler, and that means he's got to be Churchill. You never want to be Neville Chamberlain, that weasel who signed a peace deal with Hitler over Czechoslovakia, and then Poland got invaded anyway. You want to be like Churchill, even though, of course, it was Chamberlain who gave the war guarantee to Poland and declared war on Germany when Germany invaded Poland. But anyway, you don't want to be like him. You want to be like Churchill and FDR. And so, especially in Biden's senile old head, that was as deep as an analysis he could apply to any of this stuff. And you hear, Tom, all these people, they say this stuff over and over again. Yeah, when there's a bully on the playground, you got to punch him in the nose. And if there's a Hitler, you got to be Churchill. And that they just invoke these metaphors over and over and over again because they can't really talk about the complicated situation on the ground in eastern Ukraine. They can't really talk about the history of how it got to be this way without admitting that it didn't start this morning and that the Western side bears a ton of responsibility for what's happened here. And so instead you get this pablum and you get quotes somewhat out of context of Putin saying, yeah, well, Ukraine always was part of Russia and we're all one civilization anyway and all this, where they omit the part where he says very explicitly, and I think reasonably, just because he's been in power for 25 years now, 23 years then, so we kind of have an idea of what he's about here. He said, look, independence wasn't good enough. Independence meant that Ukraine took the Donbas and Crimea. But you know what? It's all right, I guess we can accept that. But America won't accept that. There can't be independence for Ukraine. America has to take it away. America has to make it into a Western colony and use it at our expense, and then to even threaten us with it, to build up its military force, to threaten us with it. And we will not tolerate that. So that's why the book is called Provoked. It's not justified. And I do have a section in the book where I argue that he certainly had other options here than to invade. I wish I had known this. In fact, I guess I don't know it. But I heard this recently and I need to look into it more. That Sergei Lavrov apparently, or someone, I don't even remember my dead footnote anymore, sorry. Anyway, somebody said that Lavrov had opposed the war. And if Putin launched this war against Lavrov's explicit advice, then he's the dumbest SOB in the world. Because there's nobody more loyal to him and his agenda or more competent at representing him. You know what I mean? Like if you're the president of something and you have a foreign minister, like you hope he handles things the way you want him to, right? But like they can't all be Antony Blinken, Tom. But Putin has Lavrov, and if Lavrov told him not to do this, I need to verify that. I should just shut up about it till I know it. But I read that the other day. Then boy, did he screw up. And I have a section in the book called Russia's Pyrrhic Victory too. It says, well, of course they're going to run off with most of eastern and southern and southeastern Ukraine here, it looks like. And yet it sure has cost them a hell of a lot as well. So the book is not about why they were right to do this, or even that to say that Biden gave them no choice but to do this. But it is to say that the Americans pushed his back to the wall and he decided to go ahead and swing before he got backed all the way into a corner, essentially.
Let's see. I think I want to see if I can get you to utter Russian propaganda one more time before I let you go. Okay. And so what I want to know now, sometimes
the Russians are reading Provoked and saying, man, there's some good talking points in here.
You should have FedExed one over there and see.
I know. Yeah. Hey, you guys could probably use this.
You could probably use this. It's coming in handy over here. All right. So here's the question. You said a little while ago, you were talking about prohibiting the Russian language and stuff. And the other side of the argument here in the U.S. will often say, yeah, they should have done that, but that was short-lived, so you shouldn't dwell on that. So to what extent it was Russia in the right, and to what extent do you think it was exaggerating when it complained about the treatment of Russians as being not a justification for war, but a grievance?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know everything that the Russians claimed about it, but I do have a section, making my own case for essentially the culture war by the Western Ukrainian nationalists against the ethnic Russians in the East. Now, part of the legacy of Soviet communism, and this is one of the things that the lady who yelled at me and called me a Russian propagandist on the Piers Morgan show said that I didn't get a chance to respond to, but that she said that was right, that part of Soviet Russification was trying to abolish the Ukrainian language. And so there are many people in Ukraine, especially in the east of the country, who don't speak Ukrainian at all. They only speak Russian, but that's not because they're necessarily ethnic Russians, but because the Soviets did everything they could to eradicate the Ukrainian language back in the battle days. That much is true. But I wasn't the one conflating everyone who speaks Russian with ethnic Russians. She was essentially pretending that I had conflated that, but that wasn't true. And there is an ethnic difference there. And And it's also, of course, just a matter of opinion as well, where some people identified more with the Far Eastern culture. And, there's a guy, Nikolai Petro is this great author who has written at length about this Ukrainian culture war. And essentially, partially because of the legacy of Soviet communism, and also the legacy of Nazi Germany in the Second World War, and of regular Ukrainian fascists before that you do have a severe legacy of left-wing and right-wing conflict with the right wing in the West and the left wing in the East there. And in a way that we just don't have experience with that here, man. I mean, you could go back to the blue and the gray back when, sort of, but like when these guys call each other commie and Nazi, they mean it. American Republicans and Democrats say that, but it's not really true. Like even people who read Marx, they don't know what it means or have any power to really nationalize all the means of production or whatever. They're just dumb. Over there's like a real legacy of people being a member of these parties and being, the kin and the relations of the people who served the Soviet communists, or even, going back another couple generations, the Germans in the West. So, and after 2004, but then especially after 2014, all the power has been in the hands of the Western nationalists. And as I demonstrate in the book, they had gone on a major campaign to rewrite the history of Ukraine. They don't have any George Washingtons and Nathaniel Greens, so they had to make heroes out of Stepan Bandera and his, neo-Nazi bands of Holocaust implementers. And so then sometimes they deny it and they go, oh, that's not true. They fought against the Germans too. And then other times they go, hey, don't deny the greatness of our Holocaust perpetrating heroes that we worship and love and adore so much. And this has been a big fight, especially since 2004, and then doubling since 14. And then forgive me on all the dates of when the different edicts were passed, Tom, in the late teens, where they're banning more and more Russian from radio and movies and TV and mandating Ukrainian language, everything, trying to, at different times, and to different degrees in different oblasts, I guess, but trying to repeal the Russian as having official status as a language in, it's not that they're banning people from speaking Russian. That's not what that means if people misunderstand that. It's saying that like government documents and government business will not be done in Russian. It has to all be done in Ukrainian, which people in the far east of the country don't speak at all. And I know people from Odessa who don't speak Ukrainian, and they're from, west of Crimea, but still. So they're, the current president there, he didn't even speak Ukrainian. He had to learn Ukrainian after he became the president. Maybe he knew a little bit of it, but he was a Russian speaker before he became the president. But he's, well, first of all, Jewish in ethnicity, I guess, as they define it. And so not identified as an ethnic Russian or ethnic Ukrainian, but identified as a separate ethnicity there, I guess, the way they count it. And so, and that was supposed to be part of his charm too, is that he would be able to split the difference and find compromise rather than just be, it's not like he is a right-wing nationalist fascist from Lviv out west or anything like that. So he was, had the potential to be a peace candidate if the Americans had helped him to implement peace. There's a great interview, Tom, that Aaron Mate did. And I'm trying to learn how to say this poor guy's name right. I hear him say it sometimes. Then I always go, Mate. It's Mate. Aaron Mate interviewed Stephen Cohen, who I guess was a bit of a commie back when or whatever, was a leftist Soviet expert, but and then a Russia expert. But they did an interview in, I'm going to say, like 20 or 21. Maybe even as early as 19, where Stephen Cohen tells Aaron Mate, now listen, when these Nazis threaten to kill the president, they mean it. And the New York Times, again, has said that as well numerous times, that these are credible threats against the president. When these Nazis say, we'll hang him from a lamppost or hang him from a tree on the main drag in Kiev, or we'll blow his brains out, they mean it. This is not like just some kook in, some southern state spouting off about he'd like to see something bad happen to Joe Biden someday. These are specific, incredible threats by people who have the means to carry it out. And so Cohen told Mate that, man, we should be protecting this guy. What he needs is a couple of good bodyguards. Send Eric Prince and a couple of guys to protect him and then help him crack down on these neo-fascist groups, arrest their most dangerous leaders and take them out of the equation here so that then he can make peace. But America did not help him to do that. And so he had people like Andriy Beletsky threatening to murder him. He was, he's not going to make peace. I'm not worried about that. He knows he'll hang from a lamppost. Or he knows I'll hang him from a tree on Khrushchev Street, whatever it's called there, the main drag in Kiev. So that's a real problem. I mean, it really is. And it's going to remain a problem. If Donald Trump, and by the way, I don't know if you saw this, Tom, and maybe I know we're running out of time here, probably want me to be quiet. So I'll just bring this up real quick, that Donald Trump said in his press conference, I guess it was yesterday or earlier today, that he's already talking with the Russians about having a meeting, and he wants to have a summit with Chairman Xi in China as well. I'd like to see him also go to Tehran and Pyongyang. It could be Donald Trump and the Great in his first month in office, if he would go and sign, real long-term understandings with these governments and dial all of these conflicts down. There's no reason in the world that the United States of America needs to have a conflict with Russia, China, North Korea, or Iran at all. And Donald Trump absolutely could come to whatever modus vivendi or whatever stupid foreign term you're supposed to use about getting along with these people, a rapprochement, and get along and even short, and all other things being equal, Tom, even short of just abolishing the world empire and bringing everything home in a Ron Paul way, we could still, again, just for the sake of argument, all other things, ceteris paribus here, with the just keeping NATO and keeping our Navy and everything. We still don't have to be in this insane state of permanent tension with these nation states, with these global powers. It's just completely crazy. We don't have to live this way. We don't have to spend this much money on militarism while our country is absolutely falling apart. And we should just give this up. And then, so I was going to add the caveat, it's not going to be easy for Trump to make peace in Ukraine. The Russians are in a position of strength. America and Ukraine are not. And he can make promises, but he can't really make many threats against Russia's position there. And so I don't know, they say he's such a genius deal maker. I've yet to see evidence of that. He did get us out of Afghanistan. He did sign a deal with the Taliban, and he did try to make peace with North Korea before his own government sabotaged him. So, and he did try to make peace with Russia before his own government sabotaged him. So I may not be completely optimistic, but I am hopeful. And you know what, Tom? He didn't just run on peace with Russia. He ran overall on peace. Even though he didn't really say that, that was what MAGA thought. That is why his voters voted for him. That's why Democrats crossed the aisle to vote with him. Enough of these stupid wars. And that includes attacking Iran for Israel too. That includes all of this stuff. And he really could just absolutely turn the tables on the entire war party within his first few weeks in power, if he's bold enough to do it. I'd like to see him try. I'd do everything I could to support him if he did too.
Well, of course, you can look like a big man on the world stage by launching a war, but you can also do so by making a diplomatic tour and coming back and saying, I've contributed to the establishment of world peace. That's also a pretty big man thing to do.
Right. And then what's Putin going to do? Invade Poland? No. So It's fine. It's fine.
Scott, obviously people get the book on Amazon, but is there any other, it's Provoked, you should all have it, but is there any other appeal you want to make or link you want to give out or anything else you want to say?
Sure. If you go to scotthorton.org, if you follow that link, I'll get an extra little kickback from Amazon there. The hardback is coming soon. I've had motherboard problems with my main computer this week, but I got a new one coming. I'm so ASC, man. I haven't been able to really work on everything I need to in a few days. But I'm getting that solved. And so I'll have the hardback should be out within a few weeks. It's going to be 938 pages because it's going to be properly sized at 6x9 there. And then I'm also working on the audiobook. The H.W. Bush section should post sometime next week, the first few sections of it. And that's going to be a podcast series from my Substack, and that is scotthortonshow.com. Because the thing's going to be like 45 hours long. It's going to take me months to do it.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, Fool's Errand, I mean, Enough Already had no footnotes, so it was like 300 pages of prose entirely, you know? And that was, what, like 9.5 hours? I think, no, Fool's Errand was 9, and Enough Already was 12. So, you know, I don't know, whatever it is, it's going to take till summertime or something to get the whole thing done, probably. But so it's going to be a subscription series in the Martyr Made style there at scotthortonshow.com.
Okay. All right. Well, we will make a note of all this. Well, best of luck. Looking forward to seeing you on the Tom Woods cruise. We're going to have a lot of fun. That's coming up very, very soon. Very super, super crazy soon. So TomWoodsCruise.com. I hope you have a passport, Scott, that's valid. Do you?
Oh, yeah. I'm ready to go.
All right. So cutting it a little close at this point. So check out Tom Woods Cruise also. But the key thing is, I mean, part of your qualifications for your membership card in our movement is owning a copy of this thing. So stop listening to us now and go do that. But if you are watching on YouTube, I'll just say 9 years of posting non-video content on YouTube, because I didn't have video, I just did the audio of the show, has absolutely destroyed my relationship with the YouTube algorithm. It has concluded nobody enjoys it. You know, so
I got 6,000 episodes, no video, and boy, do they hate that.
It hates that. So, it doesn't want to deliver my episodes to the public or to my subscribers. So the way we're going to counteract that, people, is every time you are watching me on YouTube, you gotta hit like, you gotta leave a nice comment, you could share it, and then that gets it through the thick skull of this robot we're up against. That, you know, Woods does well on all the other on the audio platforms. Maybe we ought to, let his subscribers see the episodes. So if you could do that, that would also be wonderful. Anyway, Scott, see you soon. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.